You know, in investing, buying can feel like the easy part. It's exciting, right? But the really tough question, the one that probably keeps a lot of us up at night, is when is the right time to sell? Well, today we're going to get some real clarity on that by diving into the wisdom of the master himself, Warren Buffett.
So yeah, when is the right time? This is a dilemma that trips up even the pros. Do you sell just to lock in a nice profit? Or maybe you sell to cut your losses on a stock that's tanking. It can feel like you're trapped no matter what you do. But Buffett's take on this, well, it just cuts right through all that noise. And honestly, it's probably not what you're thinking.
Okay, so let's look at some of the common reasons people sell. You know, things like locking in profits or cutting your losses. These are the classic emotional triggers, right? The problem is, they're all focused on one thing, the price you paid for the stock. But Buffett argues this is a huge mistake. Why? Because what you paid is just a historical fact. It has absolutely zero to do with what that business is actually worth today or what it's going to be worth tomorrow. It just anchors you to the past.
And that leads to this quote, which I absolutely love because it's so blunt. Buffett said, "The stock does not know that you own it. You have all these feelings about it, and it doesn't give a damn." I mean, that's the crucial reframe right there. The stock doesn't care if you feel like a genius because you bought it cheap or an idiot because you bought at the top. It has no idea who you are. The only thing that matters is the value of the business itself.
Okay, so if we toss out all that emotional baggage, what are the actual legitimate reasons to sell a stock? Well, according to Buffett, there are really only three. And the first one is purely logical. You've found a better opportunity, a demonstrably better place to put your money.
Here's a great historical example of this. Back in 1959, Buffett owned stock in a company called Commonwealth Trust, and by all accounts, it was a good investment, an undervalued bank. But then, he found Sanborn Maps. And Sanborn Maps wasn't just a good investment, it was a terrific one, a deeply, deeply undervalued business. So what did he do? He sold his position in the good company so he could pour that capital into the terrific one. It's about making your money work as hard as it possibly can.
But wait a second. This is a super important point we have to make. There are kind of two versions of Warren Buffett, right? The modern Buffett, who runs Berkshire Hathaway, often talks about holding businesses forever. But you gotta remember, he's buying entire companies and views them as part of the family. Selling for him is a huge deal. For most of us, though, it's the early Buffett we should be listening to. The guy who said his bread and butter was buying undervalued stocks and selling when that undervaluation was corrected. That's a much more relevant model for individual investors like us.
All right, that brings us to the second legitimate reason to sell. And this one's all about recognizing when the fundamental story of the business has changed for the worse. I'm talking about a significant negative shift in the company's reality. And a fantastic example of this is his investment in the Washington Post. He held this stock for over 4 decades. Think about that. He bought it in 1973 because it had this incredible competitive advantage. He didn't sell during scary news cycles or recessions. He only sold in 2014 after it became painfully obvious over many years that the internet had permanently eroded that advantage. That's what a fundamental change looks like. It's not a bad headline, it's a major long-term shift. And this principle applies to other situations too. Look at the airlines in 2020. He sold his entire positions because, as he put it, the world has changed for airlines due to the pandemic. That's an industry-wide shift, but it can also be company-specific. A few years earlier, he sold the grocery chain Tesco because he was discouraged with the management. When you can't trust the people running the show, that is absolutely a fundamental change in the business. So, what's the third and final reason to sell? Well, this one's a bit different. Sometimes the business is still great and you haven't found a better opportunity, but you might still need to sell. And the reason for this is simply risk management. Now, we all know Buffett is a massive fan of concentration. He'd much rather put a lot of money into a few great ideas than a little money into a lot of mediocre ones. Just to give you a sense of how extreme this can be, back in 1967, he had an incredible 40% of his entire partnership's money in one stock, American Express. That is some serious conviction. However, and this is key, even for a great company, a position can just become too risky. As American Express performed well and its stock price went up, that position grew to be even more than 40% of his portfolio. And at that point, he trimmed it back down. It's not because he stopped believing in the company, it was just about managing the overall risk. You got to keep things in balance. Okay, so there you have it, the 3 logical reasons to sell. Now the real trick is to bundle this all up into a simple framework that you can use to replace those emotional triggers we talked about at the very beginning. And that framework really boils down to this one powerful question. If you didn't already own this stock,
Would you buy it today at its current price? Seriously, this one question cuts through all the noise. It forces you to forget what you paid for it. It gets rid of all that emotional baggage and makes you reevaluate the investment objectively, right here, right now.
So here's how you put it into practice. First, you ask that big question, would you buy it today? If the answer isn't a clear, enthusiastic yes, then you move to step 2. You have to acknowledge the costs of selling, things like taxes and transaction fees. And this is so important because those costs create what you might call a do-nothing zone. The stock might not be a buy more anymore, but selling and taking that tax hit might not make sense either. So you just hold. And sometimes doing nothing is the smartest move of all.
So when you pull it all together, what we're really talking about is a shift in mindset. It's about thinking less like a stock trader who's just reacting to price blips and more like a calm, rational business owner. When you can replace those emotional triggers with this simple, logical framework, one of the most stressful decisions in investing suddenly becomes one of your most rational. So the real question to leave you with is, what's one emotional selling trigger you're going to replace with this framework?